that sounds like that's agreement. Okay. Steve, did you have any other follow-up? I think we need to come fairly shortly to an idea whether we are close to making a recommendation or if there are one or two issues that are really going to interfere with us making a recommendation tonight. So I'd like to see.
Yeah, I think I voiced my primary concern, and I don't think it's a insignificant one. We have a critically imperiled natural community, one of only 4 locations of a state endangered species and a threatened species. And we're, even with our tacit approval of the reuse in that professional office building, I think we're sending the wrong message. We have one chance to get it right. I mean, these are truly irreplaceable areas for the state of Maine, and it's just that northern end of the runway primarily. And I'm reluctant to send that message even to the council at this time. I think it's awfully premature, and I think it could arguably be said that it is not consistent with the existing comprehensive plan in terms of the treatment of those truly irreplaceable natural resources at that end of the runway. It's not a new issue. It's an issue I personally have been involved in since 2001, and an issue that the former base natural resource planner worked actively to maintain those resources and enhance those resources. And again, I said earlier, if our goal is to increase predictability into the process and efficiency of review of reuse, which is certainly an admirable goal, and I think the whole community supports, I don't think setting up a future occupant of that office space or park for conflicts with the Maine Endangered Species Act and other issues gets us to our goal. And looking at the maps before us tonight versus maps in the master reuse plan, I think we've moved in the opposite direction in terms of areas that were highlighted as natural areas in green, and the former plan and the reuse plan are now completely included in either the aviation reuse or the professional office reuse. So I think we've, instead of getting better in terms of this issue, I think we've slipped a little further the other way.
Steve, would there be a way to define that professional office district in a way that
Absolutely.
would protect things?
Absolutely, and I think I submitted that in a
as
previous memo to other board members.
In others, we could be very specific to say that in our view, the professional office shall not even may not, but shall not include lands that are I mean, we could do that.
Which would, yeah, I guess the concern would be in doing that, you would take a fairly sizable chunk out of that district. So why not, instead of doing it through wording, just do it with a sub-district boundary change?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is it is a sub-district bound. That's exactly what it is, that we require the sub-district line be drafted such that it meets your standard.
I hear exactly what Steve's saying, and our EIS consultants are doing the additional analysis that Steve had asked them to do, and the potential conflict is kind of right on the border here where this district goes. And as I said, if there is habitat actually there, then that boundary will probably be shifted away from that.
But we could require that. We could say we wanted to do that.
Well, yeah,
but within our local jurisdiction to do exactly that.
You certainly can do that, but I guess I would wait for the science, the final science, to dictate that a little bit, and because we don't know exactly where those are.
I certainly don't want to get in an argument here, but the area has been very well documented. I don't think there's anything a EIS statement from out-of-state consultants could add to what we already know here in the state of Maine.
May I
Anna?
make a comment? We have significant resources throughout the town, and a lot of it is covered by overlays, and some of those overlays are also dependent upon what is on site. And we do it on a parcel-by-parcel basis. Vernal pools, for instance. If there's a vernal pool out there and we're not sure, we're out there checking it. And then it is a site-specific determination. why can't we do something similar to that? And based on the information that we get from the EIS, information that we have from Steve, and possibly develop an overlay so that it would be on a case by case?
I mean, I don't have any problem with that. But I want to, and Dana was part of the reuse plan. We took great care, I think, in developing the reuse plan to really be sensitive to the natural resources on the property. We're providing, we provided designated well over 1,000 acres for natural areas to protect. I mean, we broke up some of the properties so that we can preserve some significant natural areas. Certainly, if there's some other things that are there, we're going to protect those. I mean, that's our vision of the plan. So we're not going to overrun a significant natural habitat just for, an extra 10 acres in a business park. We'll move that boundary. I just want to make sure that we're following a process. So and there may be other boundaries that may shift depending upon other things that are currently being analyzed as part of the EIS. So they're looking at all the natural systems. Now, we thought we did a pretty good job. Maybe this boundary gets shifted a little too far west, and we'll adjust those. And I think I'm speaking for Dana as well, that we're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes here. We want to be sensitive to the environment as part of the reuse plan. That's part of the vision of the project here.
I fully hear what Steve Walker is saying, and I guess the difficulty I have of somehow calling that out or writing that or redrawing the line is for the rest of the 3,200 acres, we're doing it based upon the EIS information. And I just think we ought to be consistent and let that be the driving force. I'm fully confident, it sounds like you are too, Steve, that it will get us there and that it will therefore be protected. And so I guess I worry that we're going to say, well, we know that there's nesting going on there, therefore we need to act, or we know there's another piece over here that's wet and isn't going to be an office park. I appreciate that, but I just think we sort of need to have one process that kind of drives it, and I think it's the EIS.
I guess the last comment I'd make and follow up to that is when the reuse plan came out, I know I made comments, and I think others did as well, that those wildlife species weren't even included in the natural resources section of the master reuse plan. And despite those comments being submitted, the master reuse plan wasn't updated. So here we are 2 steps further down the road, and it's still, these well-known issues still haven't been addressed. So I'm just concerned at this point as to when they could. And getting back to Anna's comments, this isn't the sort of issue that you can deal with on a site-by-site basis like a wetland or like a vernal pool. This is pretty serious stuff. I mean, it's Maine Endangered Species Act. It's could be Federal Endangered Species Act down the road. It's not a little issue, and just encouraging MRRA and others to look hard at it and think about redesignating the zone.
I'm gonna pass this around, Steve. This is the map that we used, and there are some stars for the endangered and threatened species that were identified. I mean, this is part of the plan. They were identified, and they are pretty close to that boundary. They certainly are. So like I said, if they actually, that's not going to be an issue to move that if that is exactly right. But I can pass this around. You can see that we did identify those.
Yeah, I don't think we need to pass it around. But if that's okay as a condition to say the boundary will be adjusted, then I think we're all.
I think this issue doesn't apply just to this area. We're being asked to vote a recommendation to accept very specific uses in areas of the base. But we're not told where they are. Now, if we were looking at if we were looking at an area in town, and they said, well, we think it's on Federal Street, but it might be a street over, a street back, would we allow that? Would we set specific uses? No. And I don't see how we can recommend specific uses with flexible boundaries. And it gets into this types of use that Steve is raising, but it's also every use here. And it came up before where people brought up the issue of hazardous materials. How can we say yes when we don't really know where these boundaries are? And maybe it's a chicken and the egg argument, but I don't feel comfortable voting to recommend to accept anything about specific uses till I know exactly where those specific uses apply. I think that's a fundamental problem we have with what we have right now.
I think it is a chicken and egg thing. I mean, you're right. We don't know. We don't know where the lots are. We got buildings that have no lots. I mean, the whole thing is what it is. And so this is what we're doing. I guess if we had the beauty of having wonderful surveys and incredible details and everything, life would be quite different. But it's simply not the way it is. And, I understand how we got here. I understand, the frustrations of not knowing exactly where every line is, or exactly where every pollutant is, or exactly where every endangered species is, or exactly where every piece of impervious soil is. We don't know that. I think there's been some pretty good effort here to put these zones in so that they'll fit, so that they'll work, so the Navy base will be redeveloped in a responsible manner, and I think it's the best we have.
I just come back to, I hear that the town wants us to retain zoning control. Well, the reality is if we just accept carte blanche what's presented to us, we have not retained zoning control. If you go back to the overlay district when we talked about the Pleasant Street corner there, we were talking about, well, does it go to this street or that street? Well, here we're totally ignoring that. And, if that's what the town wants, so be it. But the reality is we would not accept this level of fluidity anyplace else. We would have specific requirements. Where does that zone end? Where does it begin? And we aren't requiring that here.
But we will know that when the EIS is done. And the other thing is if people agree with you and that's true, then I don't know, talk about a chicken and egg, then the EIS can't go forward because there is no specific zoning ordinance. So we have to start. Apparently, I think what's coming out of this is that there are some issues here, but that it's important for the town to start somewhere, and that this is a fairly. And I guess I would disagree with you that I don't think we have given up our zoning authority. We know fairly specifically where these lines are. I don't know where the roads are. Those roads probably doesn't even matter because there's a road here and it's going to move 40 feet anyway, and it's going to be a whole different use. So we know approximately where these things are going to happen, and so we just have to start somewhere.
What happens if we say go ahead to the council accepts it, the EIS comes back, and without question, it doesn't properly map the endangered species. How do we then fix that? Do we have to go through an entire zoning change? Is that a 6 to 8 month process? How do we fix disagreement?
That's a great question.
Well, I think there's opportunities because Steve has asked the EIS consultant to evaluate those habitats and species further. They're required to do that. They're going to come out with their draft EIS this summer. Steve and the other agencies are going to review that. Have they felt that they've documented those well enough, or do they need more work? And that's the process. And if they do need more work, then that will be done. Even after the EIS is done, we're still going to work. We're here. We're going to work with the town and we're going to work with the state to make sure that we're not going to have an adverse effect on issues. The process, I mean, I understand the fluidity of the lines right now. There will be a time, once we get the public, all the conveyances done where they're actually surveyed and we know exactly where those boundaries are, and we know everything else, then we'll actually come back to you with a revision for a map revision. So that's part of the process here.
My question is, are we going to get the same type of subtle influence we received here tonight? That the legislature says this, and the EIS says this, and the federal government says this, and you really need to go along with what MRRA says, because quite frankly, that's what I've heard tonight, is that, you know what, you just got to do what MRRA says. Now, bear in mind, we want to maintain zoning here, but, planning board, don't push too hard. And, I think that's what's being set up, because what's going to happen is EIS comes back, if we disagree with it, it's going to say, well, this EIS is there. MRRA needs to do this. You got the federal law. Planning board, do you really want to do this? Do you really think this is right? Because that's what we've heard tonight, very subtly. We've been challenged with the legislative statutes. We've been challenged with federal requirements. We've been challenged with the EIS. And then we've been told, but make sure you don't give up your zoning rights.
Steve, did you have a suggestion, Steve, as to add some clarification to something? You said you'd feel more comfortable if there was something added or something stated when we presented this to the council or presented this to someone, to EIS?
I think I was following up with what Margaret was suggesting, that if there's language in there saying that final delineation, if you will, of the professional office park or whatever boundary did not include habitat for listed and rare, threatened, or endangered species or something like that. Thinking out loud.
Yeah. Well, I would hope that the MRRA wouldn't have an objection to that. I think the only reason that it is objectionable is that but it's partly you have an enormous expertise. This is clearly an area that has been identified as a problem area. There may be other ones, but I don't think it, again, we need to stand up for what we feel is appropriate, and we need to say that. I
We
think.
wouldn't have any problem at all with a statement that says all development activities on the base must take all measures to avoid any significant rare, endangered habitat, species.
Yeah.
However you want to word that, we'd have no problem at all with that statement. None.
Okay, that's great, Steve. I think we should add that in, and I'm not sure where it goes most. I think it needs to go near the sub-districts, because it applies not only in the conservation district, but clearly it applies in anywhere. So we'll just add some language somewhere about that.
Yeah, and may I ask if it's okay with everyone to work with Margaret and Steve in coming up with that language and the placement of it? Would that be acceptable?
I see most people saying yes, so that's good.
Okay, Steve? For a comprehensive plan? We still haven't gotten an answer on that yet.
I guess I do realize the amount of infrastructure that's sitting out there ready to be used, and it's great to set a predictable, efficient process in place to allow that to happen. I guess where I stumble a little bit is on some of the more undeveloped portions, and if these sub-districts are intended to be an underlying guide and not part of the zoning ordinance, it puzzles me then why we're setting some pretty strict standards specific to those sub-districts, and whether or not some of those are consistent with the existing comprehensive plan, specifically regarding natural resources. I think back in June I submitted comments on some endangered species that are out there, and some of these sub-districts appear to be in direct conflict with many of the natural features that are on the ground and may be inconsistent with the current comprehensive planning wording in terms of not meshing completely with the high value natural resources on the ground.
I think Steve, you're referring to the potential
That's correct.
bird nest on that side, and the EIS consultants are currently looking at that. They will, and the EIS may recommend either we amend that boundary, or we have mitigation measures that are employed as part of any development plan that goes there. And once again, these are just general planning type districts. The boundaries aren't exact because we're dealing with a large piece of property. And obviously, you know, we said in our plan, and the state's, you know, laws prevent us from developing those areas anyway if there are significant resources, and we certainly will abide by that. So, you know, certainly if there's recommendations to move a particular boundary which is not cast in stone, or employ mitigation measures as part of development, we're certainly going to do that.
So if predictability of the review process is the underlying objective, wouldn't it make it more sense to start with taking those areas that we know about out and adding those to the conservation district right now, rather than?
Well, I think what we did, Steve, to be honest, is we did those boundaries in good faith based upon the information that was provided. Only after the plan was adopted did we have new information. So, you know, we're certainly looking at that, and if we have to amend the boundary of the plan, we certainly will.
We could look at page 13, which is where we talk about subdistricts.